Good morning. Let me welcome our soon-to-be growing crowd to our spring conference. It's a pleasure to see everybody. I've had a chance to, I think, welcome everyone individually as they've come in. And we have, I think, quite a morning for you, if I may say. If you didn't arrive as an expert on the Middle East and particularly Syria, by the time you leave after lunch, you will be. There aren't any certificates of credentialing going to be handed out at the end, but you can strut your newly acquired knowledge and penetrating understanding in your social and business conversations. It's my pleasure to preside the council. This is my first board meeting and conference as newly elected president. It's been an eventful early presidency with having to replace our staff, both members, Joyce Chandran and Grace McAllister, who many of you have met in the past, resigned in April, basically. Each for independent reasons, but have now been ably replaced by someone I think everybody's been able to meet, Paul Johnson, our new executive director, who's been on the job for about a month, but who's no stranger to me since we worked together twice at the White House Writers Group with his two stints there, the company from which I retired 5 years ago, and we've collaborated through an organization in Buenos Aires for which he used to work, the Centro de Estudios Americanos, and have ended up contributing, both of us, to its publications, and we've written articles together. So Paul and I have a long track record of working together, and I think it's working well now for the last month, and God willing for the future. We meet on a sad morning. I mean, the tragic shootings last night at the Jewish Museum, you've doubtless seen and heard about them, of two embassy staff, the Israeli embassy staff, by an obviously deranged person, sadden, I think, everybody and shock us. But they help underscore the dark side of the conflicts in the Middle East as much as last week's visit of President Trump to the Middle East and his surprise meeting with Ahmad al-Sharaa, the new president of Syria, and his decision to lift sanctions on Syria as an encouragement to Syria's revolutionary change, are the bright side of Middle East politics now. So we have a morning here to delve into this thorny and complex topic with some of the most deeply expert people on the subject we could have, and leading off, for which we are very grateful, virtually and at long distance, our own member, Ambassador Ryan Crocker, to set the stage for the two panels and our concluding luncheon discussion that will be our conference today. So Ambassador Crocker has addressed us virtually several times in the past, and we're happy, Ryan, to have you with us this morning. I'm not going to introduce you reading off your titles. There's too legion to mention, and frankly, they should be familiar to anybody who's read a newspaper in the last 30 years. So with that, I give the floor to you to open our conference, Ryan. Thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you, Phil, and good morning to all of you. I'd like to start by expressing my own sense of deep sadness and outrage over the attack last night. It was a lot of things, an act of vicious anti-Semitism. It's also a political act, clearly. No country has lost more of its diplomats than the United States, so I feel a great sympathy personally for the victims of this attack. And I think, as Phil said, it's got to heighten all of our resolve to do everything we can to make the region and the world a better place. It's an honor to be with you this morning, and once again, I salute the incredible foresight of the Council in foreseeing that President Trump would meet with President al-Sharaa in Saudi Arabia months before it happened. So So the timing could not be better, and the list of speakers that you've assembled here today could not be more robust or more knowledgeable of the region. All of that said, I will just take a few minutes to give a kind of a quick overview as I see it, and then the panelists can disassemble everything I've said and correct the record. The revolution in Syria was a true revolution. And like all true revolutions, it's very hard to predict where it's going, including by the revolutionaries itself. We're approaching the 6-month mark of that revolution, and I would say, on balance, things have gone better, or at least less worse than I initially expected. There have been problems, certainly. There has been violence. We have seen in particular, the violence in the Alawi regions, both attacks on government forces and acts of retribution. Those have diminished somewhat in intensity, but they still are ongoing. And again, an unpredictable course ahead. But we've also seen some recent activity on the part of Islamic State to remind us all that they are still there, that they are incredibly resilient and persistent, and will seek any opening and crack to reassemble and reassert themselves in Syria and beyond. The car bomb attack in al-Mayadeen, the first in a number of months, is graphic proof that they are still out there. We've also seen recently violence between the Druze community in the south and the forces of the new Syrian state that bring in another dimension, the regional dimension, and I'll say a few more words about that in a moment. But again, the level of internal unrest has been, frankly, less than I expected. But that does not mean that the trajectory is clearly for the good here. We've seen through our own experience in places like Iraq and Afghanistan that the forces of disorder sometimes go to ground when they face cataclysmic change and are slow to rise, but that rise nonetheless may still be coming. So I would say that it is so far reasonably good, but far more lies ahead of us and Syria than lies behind in terms of judging the overall impact of the December revolution. Another element that I think has tracked better than I expected has been the situation in the north with the predominantly Kurdish region, where we've seen several positive developments. One of them, of course, in Turkey with the cessation of hostilities announced by the PKK, which, of course, is affiliated with the Syrian Kurds, and what that may mean for stability in Turkey and in northern Syria. And we've also seen the outreach from the administration of Ahmad al-Sharaa to the Syrian Kurds and the conclusion of an agreement, at least in principle, for cooperation, not confrontation. Again, a positive step, but not a determinative one. Lots more to go. In the region, Syria, of course, does not exist in a vacuum. And the panelists will be discussing the regional implications of the revolution and again, the competition for power and influence among regional players. I would say one thing about one dimension that has not received a lot of attention, and that is both indigenous and regional, and that are the Palestinians in Syria. The Assad regime, of course, its rhetoric notwithstanding, was an implacable enemy of Palestinian nationalism. It was Hafez al-Assad's decision to withhold air support for the PLO in September of 1970 that led to the victory over them by the forces of King Hussein of Jordan. And really ever since, it was a hallmark of the Assad regime to do whatever was necessary, particularly in Lebanon, to suppress any movement toward a Palestinian state. And we clearly saw that in Syria, where not a peep or whimper was heard from the substantial Palestinian population in Syria, nor is much heard of them today. But again, in a situation that is so fluid, so volatile, it is beyond my powers of prediction to say what these winds of change and the cross currents that we see now blowing in the region may have on the Palestinian population of Syria. I simply flag it as something to have on the screen. And then just going around the horn here, again, I referred to the clashes between Syrian Druze and the Damascus regime, in which Israel was involved to some extent. Those have subsided, but Israeli actions and incursions in the south still continue. It is very clear that Israel is determined that whatever happens in the new order in Syria, that it not threaten Israel's security along its northern border. And we will have to see how this develops. In Turkey, of course, we have seen a substantial interest on the part of Turkey in northern Syria, primarily driven by its concerns over the Kurds on both sides of the border. As I've said, there is some cautiously optimistic news now out of both Syria and Turkey with respect to the Kurdish situation. We'll have to see where that goes. And I would also note here some significant U.S. engagement. The recent meeting of the U.S.-Turkey-Syria Working Group committed both countries to the efforts to the stability and unitary nature of Syria. We'll have to see where this goes. I would also note here, of course, the big loser thus far in the regional equation vis-a-vis Syria, and that, of course, is Iran. Iran was Syria was Iran's only Arab ally. That was an alliance that I personally saw form in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution of 1979, and in particular the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 1982, where Tehran and Damascus formed a truly unholy alliance against both Israel and the United States. And both of our countries, Israel and the United States, paid a pretty horrific price in blood in Lebanon as a result of that alliance. That was the lifeline for Hezbollah. And as we saw, of course, in the past year, the double whammy of, or triple whammy, if you will, of the Israeli actions against Hezbollah that decimated its leadership as well as its fighting ability in the south of Lebanon, plus the direct Iran-Israeli confrontation in which Iran came off the significant loser. And then finally, the revolution in Syria itself that literally cut the lifeline through Syria, from Iran through Syria to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So that, I think, from a Western standpoint, is all to the good. But again, if I learned anything over my years in the Middle East, it is the strategic patience and staying power of our adversaries, most notably Iran. And it can be safely assumed, I think, that Iran will seek every opportunity to regain its influence, at least in part, both in Lebanon and in Syria. Let me now turn to what has got to be on everyone's mind, the international dimension, and particularly the role of the United States. We've long had an interest in Syria, most particularly the struggle against Islamic State that we led successfully, but that is, as I've already noted, an ongoing fight. I saw al-Qaeda in Iraq beaten almost literally to death, but not quite, as a result of the U.S. surge in 2007, 2008, and yet we saw it emerge from the ashes in Iraq and particularly in Syria, to the extent that it controlled substantial portions of both countries. That will is still there. And our staying power in the north, where we maintain, of course, a troop level exclusively for the fight against Islamic State, working with our Kurdish allies and with the Syrian government. And I think we play a significant role in making sure that our allies in this fight don't turn on each other, as well as the Turkish element. All of this, I think, is a powerful argument for continued U.S. engagement and vigilance in the northern part of Syria vis-a-vis Islamic State. And that takes us to the historic meeting in Riyadh between President Trump and President al-Sharaa. It was a very bold move, an unanticipated move. I think it caught many of President Trump's own advisors by surprise. And for my money, a very positive step, not without risk, but then all bold moves carry risk. The lifting of sanctions does give the regime the opportunity to, or access to funds to provide some economic hope for the country, some development of infrastructure, and hopefully enough stability to provide for a rule of law, which thus far has been notably absent in the proceedings that we've seen on the ground in Syria for the last almost 6 months. But it is, again, a strategic decision by the president to lift sanctions. Now comes the hard part, and I will be very interested in hearing the panel's reflections on what is and should be the ongoing U.S. role in Syria. To my knowledge, we have not yet reopened an embassy or a liaison office in Damascus, partly for policy reasons, pre-sanctions lifting, partly for security reasons. I very much hope that we get on with the important step of establishing a permanent presence on the ground in Syria. As all of you know, and I certainly know from my decades of experience in the Middle East, you've got to be on the ground day to day, dealing with the government and other political factions to first assess conditions and most significantly then to shape them. There's only so much that can be done by presidential decree. There's only so much that can be done by long distance, that a diplomatic presence on the ground, and this can be short of full recognition. We have lots of mechanisms for liaison offices or interest section. I've served in both in the course of my career, but having an American diplomatic presence on the ground in Syria as we seek to navigate these waters and to ensure that the presidential decision to lift sanctions carries Syria and the region in a positive direction and not the opposite. And I'd have to note here that the tool chest that we have to influence events is somewhat limited. And I'm referring in particular to USAID. The effective closure of USAID as a development agency may be felt in Syria as well as elsewhere. I am thinking that of the classic use of, or the classic tools of U.S. power, defense, diplomacy, and development, we have kind of unilaterally disarmed in the development category. And again, humanitarian assistance is vital. That has always been a hallmark of the United States' role globally. And I would say that in Syria, that remains important, but so does potentially a coordinated, focused development effort. And I'm thinking in particular here of education and healthcare. But again, we do not have any longer a USAID capable of carrying out those missions should the President and the Secretary of State direct. And I hope that as we look at further downsizing in the federal government, that the axe is spared or used as a scalpel at the State Department, not as a chainsaw, because we're going to need all the diplomats we can get globally as the president sets a new course in U.S. foreign policy, and in particular in Syria, where we've got so many complex factors, actors, and actions to contend with. We need to be on the ground, and we need to have the right number of area specialists fluent in Arabic to execute the president's policies. So, again, what I see in general is a lot of opportunity, a lot of peril, some hope. And I could not help but reflect watching the historic meeting between the two presidents, President al-Sharaa and President Trump, that it had been 25 years since the last meeting between a Syrian and an American president. I was present for that meeting. It was March of 2000 in Geneva between President Clinton and President Hafez al-Assad. It was an attempt to close a Syrian-Israeli peace deal that had begun its active phase a couple of months before in Shepherdstown, West Virginia, where then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and then Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk al-Shara met for the first time face-to-face for extended conversations on what a comprehensive peace between Syria and Israel might look like. Obviously, we fell short, just short, literally by a few yards, of concluding that agreement at that time. But 25 years later, the meeting between President Trump and President al-Shara holds open at least the prospect of a return to U.S. diplomacy as a means of brokering, among other things, an understanding between Israel and Syria that could further reshape the Middle East. And here I'd have to, again, point to the significance of President Trump's Gulf trip, his meetings in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, and in the United Arab Emirates. Of course, it was at the urging of Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia that the meeting with President al-Shara took place. This is a moment in which we can see that U.S. leadership, U.S. engagement can be critical. And that's not just our assessment. That clearly was the assessment of the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the Qataris, all of whom have urged a more robust U.S. engagement in Syria and in particular the lifting of sanctions. Well, President Trump has now done that. And I think, it indicates that the U.S. remains that indispensable nation. We have to be careful not to overcommit, but undercommitment can be just as dangerous, I think, to regional security and our own national security as we move forward. So, again, I look forward to the rest of this day. And as Phil said, I think we will all emerge wiser as a result of the extraordinary body of knowledge that you've assembled here. And again, it is a moment fraught with both peril and opportunity. My advice to anyone who would listen to me would be for the U.S. to follow a decisive engagement led by President Trump with sustained engagement in Damascus, with the Syrians, with the region, and internationally. Ultimately, what happens in Syria will be determined by Syrians, but I would argue that the U.S. will maintain, for however we choose to use it, the decisive power in shaping those outcomes. So I look forward to the rest of these proceedings and look forward to increasing my own knowledge. Thank you.
Well, Ambassador Crocker, Ryan, thank you very much for those insightful remarks and that magnificent magisterial, I could say, tool of Syria's borders and of the other interested outside powers that will affect the developments there. We have time for some questions. I think you have a hard stop in about 10 minutes, I believe. Can you hear me, first of all? Okay, fine.
Okay, fine.
So I'd like to offer the floor to anyone who has a question to Ambassador Crocker. And if you're still formulating one, I have a question, which is, we didn't talk, I think, so much. I was a little distracted with logistics here, but we didn't talk so much about the impact of all of this on Russia, which has depended importantly on Syria for its whole position in the Middle East. Would you like to say a little bit more about that, perhaps? And then,
well, thanks very much for the question, because it occurred to me that I did omit any mention of Russia. Russia does maintain its military presence in Syria, where it has been very, very quiet of late. And again, I think that among the losers in the fall of the Assad regime, clearly Iran led the list, but Russia was not far behind. The Syrian civil war both was a necessity and an opportunity for Russian intervention to support, again, their only real ally in the Arab world, Bashar al-Assad. And they played a weak hand, I think, quite well, up until there was literally nothing left to support. So I would defer to the vast expertise on this panel, on these panels, for a more in-depth look. But I think that Ahmad al-Sharaa thus far has played this particular aspect of his hand quite competently, not seeking a confrontation with Russia, not seeking to force their bases to close, but making it clear that any Russian activity in support of the remnants of the Assad regime would be looked at with extreme disfavor. And again, while there has been significant, at times, violence in Alawi regions, I, for one, have not seen any evidence of a Russian hand in instigating it on the Alawi side. So again, I think what Russia will do is hold its own. I would not expect them to instigate any major moves in any direction, in part because they don't have the capacity, frankly, to extend their reach in the Middle East, nor do they have an environment with the fall of Assad that is at all conducive for them to do so. Again, I would point to the fact that even during the last couple of years of the Assad rule, in spite of much speculation that Russia would use its tactical gains in Syria in support of that regime to expand its influence elsewhere in the region, that didn't really happen. So I would suggest that Russia is at full extension because primarily of the war in Ukraine, that it hasn't got the resources or the bandwidth to play a more visible or aggressive role in Syria, nor does the environment support it. So I would assume that Russia will seek to maintain its posture in Syria, without antagonizing the Syrian government. And the Syrian government, I think, with its plate more than full, will not take any actions against that presence as long as it remains neutral and benign with respect to activities inside Syria.
Thank you. Ambassador Stuart Bernstein has a question, Brian.
Thank you. You're a household name here, so thank you for sharing your wisdom with us. Assad, can he change his stripes? Can you really think he can pull this off?
The new Syrian president.
Yeah, can he pull it off? Well, that is the huge question that I hope today's conference will, if not definitively resolve, at least give us pointers to look for as to what we can expect in the future. Again, I've been impressed with his statesmanship thus far, his outreach to the Gulf Arabs, gaining support from them, particularly Saudi Arabia. Qatar, I think, was supportive all along, but Saudi support was crucial, and it was that support that, of course, led to the meeting between President Trump and President Sharaa. I think he has also been restrained in his approach to Israel thus far, although I look forward to hearing a more detailed and nuanced version of those events from our panels. That for someone who had his nom de guerre with as Mohammed the Golani, he has wisely not made an issue out of Israel's presence and occasional incursions inside Syria or its military actions against remnants of the Syrian armed forces and their armaments. So again, I think there is a very delicate balance between the outlook and the survival instincts of the new regime in Syria and Israel's desire and imperative to secure its northern border from further dangers. That offers again both an opportunity and a challenge to maintain some comity here to avoid a full escalation of force. And guess who is likely to be essential to seeing that that process moves forward? It would be the United States, no one else.
Is it a mistake? Oh, no. Is it a mistake to lift the sanctions unconditionally on a regime we know really nothing about and has essentially people of very dubious past?
Yeah, that's again, it was a very bold move and an unexpected move on the part of the president, as I understand it. That his advisors were not suggesting that he take that step, and you know, were it left to me, I would have urged sustained engagement with the new regime in Syria to set some conditions for sanctions lifting. Well, the president kind of leapt that particular barrier. Now there is the hard work of, I think, of ensuring that sanctions relief takes the country in the right direction in terms of regional and international security, as well as its own stability and development. And that will be a daunting task that I would suggest can only be done, as I indicated before, with a sustained U.S. presence on the ground to shape developments after the decision, since we chose not to shape them before.
And Ambassador Don Bliss.
But I assume the sanctions could be reimposed if it doesn't turn out the way we want. But my question is, what role would there be for the United Nations and Turkey in the new Syrian government?
That's an excellent question, the role of the United Nations. And yes, sanctions can be lifted and they can be reimposed, but clearly to reimpose them would be a political step backward that we would all want to avoid. I think there is, in theory at least, a role for the United Nations through its the Secretary General's Special Representative for Syria to play an active role. We have in the past worked closely with the SRSG for Syria, and depending on how that position evolves in the new order, could do so again. Personalities count, and I think if we are to see a UN role that is effective, it's got to be someone who is going to work with us, not against us. And the United Nations has a checkered record in that regard, to say the obvious. But again, I have worked with SRSGs in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Depending on the personality, that can be a very effective instrument for furthering stability, for diffusing political arguments so that they don't develop into political confrontations. I saw that in particular with the SRSG in Iraq. But it depends on the person and the orientation of that individual. So I would suggest that as the administration now turns to the really hard work of how to use the lifting of sanctions to the advantage of the region as well as of Syria itself, in the interest of international stability, that we have a strong focus on that role and who might best play it going forward.
Well, Ambassador Crocker and Ryan, thank you very much for being with us this morning, for sharing this nearly encyclopedic appreciation of the Middle East region and its Syria, the implications of developments in Syria for the region, and the region's implications for developments in Syria. Shall we all express our gratitude to Ryan for being with us?